So, welcome to this conversation. We'll get into some introductions, but I wanted to start, before we even start that, with just taking a moment to bless the space, bless the conversation. So, if you feel to, you can close your eyes and take a deep breath. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel the sound of the rain on the tent. And it occurs to me that for this particular conversation to happen, so many things have had to happen. So many contributions from ancestors, from moments. So many things on a cellular level have had to align for us to be here on this stage, having this conversation all together. So I wish to bless this conversation in this space with a deep gratitude that we're able to be here together in safety and curiosity and love, exploring these topics, sensitive and deep as they are. So with an open heart and a soft belly, I bless this space and this conversation and all of us. And so it is. Nice. Okay, so welcome everyone to this conversation about grief, collective healing, and transformative activism. And we'll start by rooting this conversation in this topic of racial justice and all that's happened in the last 3 years. Introduce myself. My name's Holiday Phillips, also known as Mama V. I've devoted my life to moving from oppression to liberation in all forms. Most important devotion in my life is to my son, Ocean, who is tucked up at home right now. I'll hand over person by person to just do a quick introduction.
That was quite a short intro for you. I love that. It's like my devotion to my son. I love that.
The important stuff.
I'm not like that. I've got less. Greetings, everyone. My name is Muti Musafiri, also known as Motivation Activations for the Nation, here to give them the light codes and electrifications. I'm an artistic director who founded a festival called Legacy 101. It's about platforming black excellence and intergenerational healing and celebrating heritage. That happens in October for Black Futures Month. I'm also the founder of Village 101, which is a black-led CIC and collective and arts organization. We repurpose abandoned buildings and turn them into hubs and regeneration centers, produce masses of creations to elevate the standard of how we create things to challenge the status quo, and we harness our creativity for social change. But at the basis of it, I'm a transformative artist, here to elevate people's consciousness and bring people into enlightened states of alignment, and from there access a deep state of flow and come to a noetic truth of remembrance. And my artistry tells these stories through performance to film and through community action, in which we can build a collective reclamation of a narrative that is serving humanity into a future or Afrofuturism that we all collectively believe, love, and support, and are willing to pass down to our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amisha Ghadial, and I am the host of a podcast called All That We Are, which is an exploration of the weave between activism, the sacred, regeneration, and creativity. And I'm really interested in exploring our inner healing and how it affects the world that we live in. So I have a background in politics and sustainable fashion and activism. And then now the work that I do is through my beautiful leadership mentoring, which is working one-to-one on shifting subconscious patterns and and really being able to show up in deeper relationship to your soul and what it is that you have to offer to these times. And I'm the author of a book on intuition and also the curator of a book called The Future is Beautiful.
Thank you, Amisha. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to join us on this very inclement morning. It's very kind of you. So my name is Remi. Before I even introduce myself, I'm just noticing what this conversation is already doing to me in the field. I show up feeling quite open, quite emotional. And if I cry, forgive me, but I'm right at the edge of that, so I'm just going to name it, because it's best to name these things. I'm also perimenopausal, so if I go off at tangents and forget myself, forgive me, I'll be right back. So my name is Remi. I'm very proud to say that I'm one of the founders of this festival. I say it's a festival, this ongoing prayer and ceremony bringing together souls from all walks of life to vision a new way together. And we couldn't do it without you, so thank you so much. I am also a strategic executive coach to very senior leadership, so I work with global leaders around the world, looking at what leadership means to them. I do that through various lenses. I'm a qualified systemic and family constellations practitioner, as well as a coach. And I run my own retreat space where we do deep spiritual inquiry around how do we align to what it means to be a leader for ourselves before we emerge as leaders in the world. So that's the main nub of my work. I myself feel like I have been on a transformational path since I emerged on this planet. And actually what I will say is whether my transformation is of a room or a car or myself or aiding someone else's life, that I am deeply, deeply inspired and deeply believe in our unmet human potential, irrespective of who we are and what we bring through. And I bring that energy, I hope, to this conversation because there is so much unmet potential here, and I'm really grateful that people are showing up to explore it and engage it with us. So thank you, and thank you, Holiday, for convening us.
Thank you. Thank you all. So my suggestion here for this conversation, because it's so rich and so deep, is that we really start really in the 3D world, and then we can spiral deeper and deeper and further out as it feels, well, I was going to say good, maybe that's not the right word, but as it feels true. So the inspiration for this conversation to happen was reflecting on 3 years ago, nearly to this month, was the murder of George Floyd, which was, of course, one moment of many moments, not the moment, but also, a moment. And when we look back on that moment, that when you speak about unmet human potential, like the potential that there was in the collective for deep transformation, I think no one could deny. And now 3 years on, it's important to have a conversation of what has changed, what has transformed, if anything. So I would love us to start there, with the question being, what did that moment mean to you personally, as a human body in this life? And then as a leader in this space, what did that moment mean for society, for the world, and maybe even the cosmos?
In life, it meant horror, it meant trauma, it meant a public display of humiliation in which our whole humanity is challenged to its core around our moral compass, and we are asked whether we are going to let that slide or we're actually going to be a change that says to ourselves we cannot repeatedly go through this systematic trauma and see images like this and let children see images like this on social media on a casual basis and evoke a sense of powerlessness and traumatic response, which there isn't a safeguarding for people to process. So instantly into my own personal leadership, it caused for me to take to the streets. It caused for me to speak the uncomfortable conversations with all parties in my life. It caused for me to charge into the unknown by simply showing up and allowing myself the space to move the energy that had been stirred in me, that had been locked into me, that had been contained into me from watching that and feeling that powerlessness, to have a reclamation of power in a way that fortified a unity between the field of black culture, allies, and the morphogenic field of what's been happening into the world. And if that wasn't a nudge in a direction to actually see what had been dormant in the subtext of systematic racial oppression, that was a moment to really go, we have to break that mold. And when we're breaking that mold, it can't just be like, I break that mold and then fit back in. You break that mold and you shatter the complete illusion that has been displayed before you. And once you're laid bare on the other side of that, what you make after that is the truest choice of architecting a world and a reality you actually believe in. Because the repercussions of the visual experience of George Floyd's murder and passing was a literal PTSD moment for the whole of humanity to experience. And there is influxes of triggers that happen, and there's spikes of energy where they haven't created safe enough containers for people to, one, digest it in a way where they can experience the relationship to generational trauma that might have evoked in that moment. And there was a deep, deep, deep meditation that was asked for a whole new generation of people who probably their energy was rattling up but needed to find that kind of distillation again. And then in that moment, there was a deep level of service, a deep level of responsibility, and a deep level of passion that was going to ask us to transmute all of that energy into something positive rather than just something negative. I found myself one of the voices in my generation in that protest time. And what was interesting is in the response to all of those actions, I took to the streets and found myself chanting on top of bus stops, on top of lampposts, and really galvanizing a collective energy to remind ourselves, remember that we are one people and we are one nation. But in that moment, part of that dislodged simulation of what was happening is that we had to really acknowledge that black lives did matter because it made an significance to something that was horrific to us. So we had to make that reclamation of power be the main piercing penetration point in how we build a future together after that. So unless that was met, then we couldn't go back to a meditation of finding that neutrality. So we had to really move that energy forward, otherwise it would be lodged in. And what happened is it forced a lot of leaders in London who really stood for something different to actually have the correct conversations. And here we are 3 years later with a prayer with Ubuntu Village coming and bringing a black consciousness space to balance this scene and bringing through people that I was on the front line with, but are still serving with a heart-centeredness and a spiritual awareness of the gifts that we've been given. So we converted and transmuted that energy through films, through now holding these spaces to accommodate that transmutation, and it's asked us into a deeper level of service, of listening, and a deeper level of being able to be in the commitment to what is being asked to architect this new earth together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, firstly, I just want to say thank you, Muti, for all of your service, your beautiful service. I'm going to tell a bit of a personal story to give context to the impact of these. It's not an event, it's an atrocity, the impact of these atrocities. I've really tried to be careful with my language, but so for those of you that don't know me, I am mixed race. So I am half Assamese, that's northeast India, tea country, if anyone's ever been to Assam. My mum comes, both my parents are dead, sadly. My late mother was a Brahmin, And she moved to the UK. She was very brilliant, and she moved to the UK to study further in the 60s, and she met my father, who was a very beautiful Nigerian man, Yoruba, so West African, so very fair-skinned, North Indian, very, very dark black Yoruba African man, beautiful. And they met and they formed a life together in London in the 60s. And they used to joke saying the Profumo affair had nothing on their marriage, because my mum, coming from a Brahmin family, meant that she would never marry out of caste, let alone out of her country. And my father's lineage is a very interesting one as well. And so, against all the odds, my parents met and married and had a 50-year-long happy marriage. And against all the odds in the 60s, they combated through their heart-centered, evolved selves racism, and not just racism from whites, racism from their own communities that couldn't really handle their marriage. So to make sure that that's a really balanced story to be told, it was very difficult for them. But against all the odds, they I've lost the word. Against all the odds, their marriage was loving and successful. And of my mum's siblings, it was the most successful marriage. They all had arranged marriages in India. So when it comes to race relations and the possibility, I feel like I am the living embodiment of that. I grew up in a household that had two utterly different cultures from the get-go. I don't know any different, right? All I know is the possibility of two people determined to understand each other and to make it work. And all I know is that through that possibility, through their loving understanding, their cultural difference, their constant navigation, and the level of nuance that brought to my life, I am so profoundly grateful for my parents for giving me the opportunity to look at race through that lens. Of course, I didn't know that was what I was being given as a child, because you don't know these things. It's only now when I look at the world and I go, wow, these guys were like, they were the progressive race relations duo, you know, and it was, you know, they had it from all sides. And so I really want to honor my parents, my ancestors now, for that gift of possibility. It has set me up in life to mean that I can be anywhere in the world, knowing that against the odds, if I hold that energy, anything is possible across cultures and boundaries. And I, you know, my background is in the city, and so again, very, very traditional English arena to function in. I mean, I don't do that anymore. It's many, many years ago. But when I think about what that belief of that embodied, and I'm going to come make my point around this, that embodied reality of what it truly means to be equitable in race relations, that's my starting point. That's different to someone else's starting point. No one is right or wrong, but that's my starting point. So when something like George Floyd, or for those of you that remember Stephen Lawrence and many, many others, have unwillingly sacrificed their lives, what that does for me is it takes me from a place of total possibility. It shatters it, only temporarily, mind, because against the odds, I believe we will always conquer through love. But in that shattering, there is something devastating that happens to your nervous system, quite literally, right? Because it's hard for me to believe that that is the truth. It's hard for me to believe that it's hard for me to believe that that level of hatred exists on the basis of the colour of our skin. It's hard. And so, But I thank my parents because I always come back to the truth that I cannot know to be true, because guess what? That's what I came from, you know. And that is what I believe we need to embody. And I'm sure we'll come on to other questions, so I'm going to not say my second part about embodiment, but there is a whole piece there for me about how we start to move into embodied spaces where we can feel the facts. It's very difficult. And you asked the question about what has it done as a practitioner? So for me, working with very senior leaders around the world, I made a choice, which was to work with what was going on around George Floyd and to utilize education as a form and as a means of empowerment. Because actually I work with a lot of white leaders, a lot of extraordinary leaders who really, really care and who are utterly petrified because they don't know how to even address such a thing. They don't know how to have this conversation. They are frightened because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to virtue signal. They don't want to be in a situation where they're not being compassionate enough. They understand that they don't fully understand. And so for me, that is unmet potential, right? That is the conversation that I want to be having. And it's caused, I've had a lot of grief, to be honest. There have been friends of mine from across the diaspora that say, well, hold on a minute, why are you the person that's telling or educating? Why do you need to be re-traumatized? And I said, because I am here, because that is what I truly believe, against the odds, is possible, right? And that's what I want to show up and bring as a practitioner. But it's difficult. It's not easy, right? It's not an easy one. But it is absolutely possible. And I believe that these conversations and the fact that you're taking time out and the fact that we're all here, opening our hearts, you know, tapping into some very, very sensitive spaces is absolutely what makes the difference. And if anybody ever feels that they are frightened of this topic but they want to do something about it, please reach out. I would love to have a conversation with you. I would love for people not to be in fear, because we are generating more of the same. And I don't believe that by generating more of the same, more anger, more vitriol, more racism, more venom, I don't believe we are going to get anywhere. But I do believe that against the odds we can. Thank you.
Thank you, beautiful Remi. Well, first I just want to say thank you for coming to be here and for choosing this in amongst everything else that's happening this morning, and a festival, a gathering of people for transformation, spiritual transformation. In every culture around the world, it includes like the fasting as well as the feasting, you know, that we go through the moments of grief and that we address and we spend time with what's difficult and uncomfortable so that we can actually be in a transformative experience. And we live in a culture that loves entertainment and peak joy. And so just to honor you for choosing to come and be here. These last, 7 years have been really full on. And for me, as a brown woman that has lived in very, very white spaces throughout my life, just happened to be the places that I've lived, the places that I've worked, the schools that I've been to. I've often been one of the only brown people in the space. And for me, something about what happened in 2020 had a similar energy to what happened in 2017 around Me Too and women, which is that suddenly all the stuff that was private, that was kind of secret, that we sort of pretended wasn't there, although we knew, but we had our safe spaces to discuss it, was suddenly like out in the open, which is amazing, but it also brings with it enormous amounts of fragility and defensiveness and actually other forms of violence because it's so hard to hold. And I had a very intense experience around that in 2017, 2018. And then we get into 2020 and it's like, oh, okay, now we're going to have this global societal conversation about racism. And And now that's going to come up, and then everyone I know is going to now want to talk to me about what it's like to be brown. And so I was going through that process whilst I was also sat with my father, who was dying at the time. And my father was dying, having been very unwell and having gone through immense amounts of challenges and suffering due to the legacy of colonization. We talk about these things as if they happened a long time ago, but my father was born into colonized India. Independence happened the next day, but trauma is in our wombs for 13 generations. And so we can't expect that talking about something for a year or 3 is going to heal many, 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 many generations of deep violence. And so for me personally, I then experienced more fragility around racism and kind of more awkwardness, as Remi was sort of speaking to, that fear of like, how do you talk about this? And then of course the performative elements of then, okay, now we need more brown people like to take microphones, to stand up, to say things. And it's all part of a process. So I feel like that's also what I want to say. Like, this is like a really uncomfortable process that we're in. And we're not, there are elements of it that are really beautiful, where things are happening and things are changing. And then there's a lot that is still just really horrific. Like the cost of living crisis that we're having in this country, like it's just, like when you actually think about like those words, like cost of living, like we're human beings born onto this planet, and yet we have to pay to be here. And we have this horrific refugee crisis where so many people, many black and brown bodies, are trying to find a safe place to live. And we still don't really have ways of handling that. And in this country, of course, the legislation is so horrific that you're like, okay, well, what have we learned? So I just want to bring in both of those truths, that there's incredible transformation and healing and sophistication in language, but we have to be careful to make sure that it's not intellectual and performative, and that it actually has a way of transforming the lives of our future, so that we can live in a world where our children don't live in the day-to-day experience of these injustices.
Better? Okay, thank you all. I want to pick up a few threads to kind of lead us into a conversation about decolonization. Can I be heard over the rain? Yeah, I just can't hear myself. So I'll share a very small amount about my experience to that moment. I'm also of mixed heritage. My mum is Persian Indian, but white-skinned, and my dad is Guyanese and Bayesian, very, very dark-skinned. And I grew up in an entirely white community. In my school, about 1,000 people, just me and my sister, who were not. And so I spent my whole life, really up until that moment, I don't even know what the word would be, but with zero acknowledgement of race or racism at all. I think it would have been too painful, to be honest, for me to open to what that might have meant. And my parents, I think, had thought that the best thing for us was to make race kind of invisible, to make us like a-racial. I mean, that was a mistake. Now I know, but they did their best. So when that happened, and suddenly there was this big conversation where it felt to me like there was this enormous amount of permission to feel all of these feelings. I felt like 35 years worth of feelings in a week. So much rage and so much anger and so much grief. And the way that manifested for me, I'm just going to be really honest and vulnerable here, was actually being really angry at all white people. The problem with that was that meant being angry with my mum, with my beautiful partner who is mixed heritage but white-bodied, with my son who is light-skinned. And it was like, this isn't it. I was feeling it, but I knew on some level, like, this is not it. Like, for me to move from that place of, like, anger and vengeance and that's the sound, this isn't it. So I then went back into my, like, deep spiritual practice, and it's like, okay, it's all love, we're all one. And it's like, that wasn't it either. I went so far out. And so the last 3 years has been like this titration of, like, where is the truth in that space between, like, someone has wronged me and therefore I now need to go and fight them because so that's not it. It's all love, it's all one, there is no harm. That's not quite it either. So the question that I really find myself living is like, when I go into the fight and the conquer and the fix, I feel that I'm carrying a colonizer's mindset. Yes. When I go into the we're all one, I'm bypassing. Where's the third way?
It's a great question. And we don't actually all know each other well, so it's really just gorgeous to hear a little bit about everybody's story. And, you know, we have a lot in common in terms of the three of us grew up in white spaces. Our parents thought they were doing, you know, integrating us. Yeah. Where is the third way? I think part of the problem in our human condition, and a problem issue, again, forgive me for the choice of words, is that we are very good at making the other wrong, right? It's what we do very naturally, actually. It's how we find and push against our edges. It's how we define what we believe to be right and wrong. And a lot of that is programmed from our parenting, bless them, some good, some not so good, and then our societal pressures, and. And I think when we think about what I hear you questioning, which is, what is activism, right? How do we become active in a positive way? When actually I have recoiled from some activism because of its anger, because that doesn't necessarily work for me. It doesn't. I feel like I'm drawn into the making of the other wrong. That doesn't feel right. And I totally hear what you're saying, Holiday, about then panning out so far that there's a level of inertia that can come from not being above it all, but being removed from it all because we're so deep in the spirit realm. So to me, that question translates internally to how and what does activism look like in the new world that we are visioning. Not that we're saying is not possible, because it is possible. It's right. It's happening right here, by the way. This is possible, right? This is the possibility. So if we all sat here and thought, well, what are the things that we can do? What comes to me is there's a midpoint around honouring. And we need to speak to and acknowledge. It's a very key rule if you think about the rules of social engagement in our society. What is lacking in so much of this narrative is people are angry because they lack acknowledgement. They're angry because they have not been seen and witnessed in their spaces for what they bring. And actually, it's pervasive in that, you know, I've had to decolonize myself, right? That's been a process. I'm sure others will have a view on that. And then you look in our world and we look around, and everywhere in our world, the reference points to humanity don't reflect the diversity of humanity. And we can see that in our schools, in our education system, in our curriculums, in our museums, in the curations, in the collections, in the road names, in the city buildings, in the municipal buildings. And so this is a long-winded way of saying, for me, there is something, and again, this is only evolving and emerging in me, so forgive me my use of words if they're not quite right, but there is an embodied activism that needs to happen that comes from our innate ability to utilize spirit and all that spirit gives us, right, to be able to come back to these wounds and hold them delicately and lovingly, but also to really embody what activism means as a place of change within us, right? You know, as above, so below. We have to do that work within to change what is out there, right? If we aren't doing this bit, we cannot do that bit. If we are not in service to ourselves, we cannot be in service to others and the other, right? However you want to make that, include that. And so my midway, or my third way, in fact, it's not my midway, it's our midway, but it's an idea, is how do we, and I hope that this festival is beginning to embody that, each year we grow, how do we embody acknowledgement so that we are not just talking about it? I think you said it's not just an intellectualization, it's not just words, it's not just narratives, it's not just discussions that we're having like this and then we go off and go, oh, okay, that was really interesting, I'm moved by that, and now what? How do we literally see it? How do we see it in our spaces, in our places? And what can we do to collectively create those spaces and places so they are reference points for our families and our children, so that I can walk down a street and see a statue of somebody that represents, the human rights movement or race relations, as well as a historical figure from the Imperial Britain, and I can be in an area where I feel that people have other people to relate to in an embodied way. So I guess that's my offering to this exploration, is how do we embody activism so that it's not about making something wrong, but it's about making something lasting that we can touch and feel as real.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, flow. Oh,
Yeah, thank you, Remi. Thank you, Holiday. How does it become tangible and real? I want you to walk with me 3 years ago and the experience of what was happening in the midst of this global crisis of a pandemic, and then the horrific images we experienced. In that current time, I had repurposed the primary school. I was living in a guardianship with primary school classrooms where we had musicians, and we had a gymnasium in the center of the primary school, where the gazebos pull out like that. And we made it into a live broadcasting center and live music studio. And we used the dinner ladies' offices as an actual recording booth. We made a permaculture community garden for people to come through. We set up support groups. We spoke to various different movements, from BLM to Krishnafari to XR, and found people on the fringes of activism who wanted to do more but were stifled by organizations or institutions that were not engaging on the grassroots level but were still thinking on an operational and institutional level. So we gathered people in this space in Hackney, which we called the New School, because we had to teach each other once again. We had to revert as human beings back to primary school kids in this world and learn, how do we teach year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4? How do we experience it as a people? In which the facilities of a live broadcasting station enabled us to broadcast clear moments of discussion and performance in dedication. And I remember, what does it really embody and look like? I remember I did a cover. I had my whole live band. We were live broadcasting. I interviewed someone in Senegal, a musician from Senegal. I interviewed someone in Antigua. I interviewed someone in their car in West London, all talking about how they had harnessed their creativity in a form of activism. And the choice that we chose to do as a song to cover, we did Tupac, and see those changes. Wake up in the morning and I ask myself, like first corner should I blast myself? Feeling poor, so this is like the remembrance of it, where we can tune into the frequencies where someone has brought a piece of artistic work, and we can celebrate the chorus of that through the experience. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. That's just the way it is. And remember through the songs, and I can revamp it in a way with the musicians and bring a new element to it. We also did The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. Because that was the first time I heard a form of music carry a rhythm and a wavelength of activism in my youngest artistry. So when we come to embodying the activism, I look to pieces of music, I look to experiences that we can transmit out, where people can be in the frequency of this remembrance, but also be in the celebration of how much we've already had to overcome. Because we have to also acknowledge how much work has already been done, right? And then when it comes to really, really engaging with what it means to be an activist now, you're really educating yourself to the minute detail so that you are completely clear in how you are discussing the piercing edge that you're penetrating through collective consciousness, so that you can create this radius of space where people can be safe enough to dislodge where there's been clutter and suddenly make room for more space to breathe and more space to love. So within that, we had the new school that enabled this safe space for members of activist groups to come through, and we held a communal day for local people from Hackney. We spoke to the mayor of Hackney and said, we want to buy this school. We want to make it a regeneration center. The community's spoken, the local artists have spoken. Can we do it? And they said, no, we can give you an extension of 3 months so you can support people for a summer season, but we want to sell it as a boxing academy. And we thought to ourselves, so how much is a council now accommodating this current time that we're in and creating a diverse range of education to accommodate the problems we're facing? And it's like these people in institutional positions, governing positions, they are not challenging what is happening now. They're still working off legislations of 5 years ago. So they need to be upgraded, they need to be updated, and they need to be more clued up, and they need to have a point of reference that can engage them from an activist perspective and inform them so they can make correct decisions. And once that moment happened, we realized we have generated so much activism, galvanized the energy of the people. We had drum, immersive performances, poetry, all these amazing things and offerings for people to alchemize this energy. And at the end of it, in a heightened moment, there was one person who had a complete dislodge of their psyche and decided to spew out hate in the heightened moment where the collective body of people in this experience were opening their heart. I was leading it into the next moment, and one person spewed out hate and toxicity and fear and brought their own trauma and projected it across the whole of this group of people who had worked the whole day to open our hearts to really do regenerative work. And they spewed it off everyone. They threw the sound equipment on the floor. They threw the table on the floor. And I said, what is going on? What is actually going on? Do we actually work so hard to see this one moment be brought down by one person's instability and their devastation? And I said, wow, this is really what I'm dealing with. I had to now take after that moment, because bear in mind, when I'm gathering everyone together, we are bringing people in this polarity of like the educational side, acknowledging awareness, what we can do as a people to evolve it. But then also on the other side is like, let's connect back to the oneness of all of us. But actually, when we looked at the oneness of all of us, everyone's actually in a vertical axis, right? We're in a vertical axis. Some people are ascending in this way and their enlightened states are here, and some people are still in the heavy debris. And when they're in the heavy debris, there's some moments you can chip away at something and then blah. And that's what I realized, because people aren't acknowledging, not bringing awareness to what they need to acknowledge and then what the work is they need to practice. And then that practice is where you have the embodiment. Because in that practice, you have responses within your body and the conversations you're having to know, I feel uncomfortable here. This is making me seize my shoulders up. The breath is being stern and holding. I feel tense in my buttocks. I need to drop onto the floor and ground a bit more. When you have the response system, the feedback system of your body as a lens to what truth is, what the uncomfortable truth is awakening through you, then you can have the response of your intuitive, intelligent body, because a lot of people don't realize the body can just digest the frequency of the word, and then you can actually also release it if you feel like you're holding tension. But again, the whole of humanity had to go through this new school, this new school? How do we learn to be human again? And what did that really look like across from racial injustice to oppression to ignorance, and also to binary thought patterns, linear thought patterns. There was a massive surge of how we engage with trans and non-binary during that same time. We found ourselves in the center of Trafalgar Square on the solstice of 2020, asking myself, what can we do to make a difference? And we found ourselves in the middle of a protest rally of BLM and queer pride. And, you know, BLM is like, and then queer pride's like, woo, this is my activism. I'm celebrating life with my being free. And that was their form of activism. And I looked in the middle of it in Trafalgar Square. I'm literally there in the center of it. And I'm like, hold up. I've been going at it so intensive. I've been exhausting myself. I looked at that and I looked at one side. I was like, wow, I want to be over there. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, and then I saw this whole moment and I said, yo, I need to think of it differently. I need to think of this differently. So what did I do straight after that? I got these West African drummers. I cleared out the rally. I got the queer pride people. I said, come through. We're gonna link it up. We brought the drum circle together. We got the West African drummers because you need that to build up the energy in the center of mass and move people from the density they have in their body. And I started to create this ceremony in the center of Trafalgar Square that saw all colors, all people on the edges of these protest rallies coming and being in this moment of being like, what's about to happen? This guy in a colorful jacket's drumming and he's talking to people. And then suddenly we're drumming. And I'm calling people into rhythm. I'm calling people into call and response. And that moment evoked this three stages of responses that someone later last year came to me and said, that changed my life. They saw the whole world differently. They experienced life differently. They engaged with trauma differently. They engaged with themselves and celebration differently. And I found them and they'd recorded this moment on their phone. They said, I watch it when I feel alone. I watch this moment when I feel alone to remember. And I said, wow, goodness. So we were in the center there, we're drumming. And there's a moment where I see a young boy who looks exactly like me, but he's probably like 18, 17. And he's there and he's like, got this pent up energy and he doesn't know which way to go. So what did I do? I invited him into the center of the Hoda. We engaged in an intergenerational exchange of energy, calling in the ancestral planes, bringing it to the earth, bringing it into the social dance of it, and invited other people into this circle that evolved. And it started with 2 generations and then spiraled out to involve all different colors, genders, and creeds. We then had a person who looked like an outsider, who probably was a bit having problems with homelessness. And they came in and they felt like the outsider. I'd observed them being an outsider in the previous protests. And when they came in, the love and embrace that I engaged him with to come into the circle, some people were like, wow, acceptance, invitation, co-creation with someone that is an outsider. And that otherness became now togetherness. And then finally, this moment that I find so hilarious as well, there was a moment in which we all decided to hold hands, multicolored, different gendered beings, hold hand after that ceremony was done and dance and hold hands in a circle, skipping. And I was like, yo, this is some old school pagan stuff. But at the same time, I feel like this is a ritual for world peace. I feel like this is a ritual for world peace. I was like, I didn't even know what I started right now. Okay, cool. Let's go. We're dancing. And in that moment, there was a distillation of the collective energy that had been dispersed in Trafalgar Square. And we were able to contain it, refine it, and then bring it and amplify it out into the world. Because that being in the circle as a balanced circumference is something in which our activism can be embodied, because the energy can circulate. So it doesn't get contained with one person, it circulates. And if you work with the vertical axis of a spiral, you can ascend, you can move it higher. So you're moving out of the lower astral densities that are like, oh, let's stick in the heaviness, and you can start to become lighter from it. And you can make it lighter for you and then make it lighter for other people. So from that was just a clear story I wanted to share around how we were listening to how we as a people can embody activism. But it requires not just yourself, It requires being able to be in response with your space. How do you relate with your space and be able to be a sounding board for that space? Because when those things come up in a space, it does create a sharp edge. And you have to be like, oh, I'm not going to look away from that. I'm actually going to bring that sharp edge into the body, and I will have to respond to that correctly by proposing something different rather than getting powerless and feeling stuck in something. Because actually you must offer a response so that equation, that sentence can continue and complete, and then the next sentence can begin. Thank you.
So what I'm really feeling is that there's so many ways of being an activist, and we live in a time where there can be quite a kind of obsession in like getting it right and like doing the new thing that everyone's talking about. And I feel like if there's a part of being an activist in today's world, which is around listening to others and expanding your perspective, and listening to people that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have like certain kind of conversations with. And I think that's where the world of podcasts is so amazing, because you can listen to two people having a conversation that they wouldn't necessarily have with you, and it's like you get to be in rooms that you wouldn't normally be invited to, and it's really, really special and precious. And then there's a part which is around really showing up for what is in your own life with the most love that you can. So the main thing that I've been doing the last 3 years, as I mentioned, my dad died around in the summer of 2020, and my mum has Parkinson's, and we're on like kind of 8 years since her diagnosis. And the last 3 years it's been one of the most gruesome, torturous, intense things that I've ever experienced. And you know, there's so much around her story of what she's experiencing that is connected to the past and that is connected to systems of oppression. And she gave her life, her adult life, in service of the NHS here. And here she is, very young, and very, very, very unwell. And I've been accompanying her on this journey. And it's brutal, like it's completely brutal. The things that she says to me, the way in which I see her suffer, the way that she's become somebody that she's not, and it's like watching a slow grieving process. And what I've learned through this journey is that for me, you know, my activism was very idealistic in my 20s. I made a book called The Future is Beautiful. And then it was very like fighty and like, I'm going to say the thing that no one else is going to say because I don't give a shit. So I'm just going to say the thing. And then there was a point where I was like, oh, maybe I do give a shit because this is like a lot to hold by myself. And now I'm going to be a bit more careful and about what I say where, so that I don't have to then be in a dark room by myself processing really, 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 really heavy shit without any support. And what I've learnt through my mum's illness is a deep level of resilience and a deep level of patience and a deep level of love, and being able to be in the moment and being able to accept how awful something is. And so for me, you know, as I'm watching this, I relate it to all of the injustices that I experience in the world, and to be able to accept them, and then to be able to, through the love that I am, and through the wisdom that is there in me, through my ancestors, through my future generations, through all that we are as individuals, to be able to show up for these like little moments where there are these little cracks where like something can happen that's beautiful, that's transformative. And you know, in the case of my mum's illness, it's like, you know, when I can just make her laugh for a minute when she's been crying or screaming all day, you know, and so I want to invite all of you to also recognize what's being put in your own life where you can show up as an activist, and where the microcosm of what you're experiencing, you know, how that affects the macrocosm of the whole bigger picture. And we all have, there's there's so much going on everyone's doorstep. And so that is a part of how you show up as an activist, as well as how you show up in a more kind of like intellectual, like what is the big story, what is the big picture. And we need both.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we touch grief as a medicine before we wrap up. But one of the things that, from hearing all of you speak so beautifully, I want to share a story that I think is a really helpful, that occurs to me when I hear you all speak. Because when I hear you all speak, what comes through to me is like, at the root, we're talking about values. Like, what do we value, and what kind of values do we want to live in a world based on? And radical, when I think about radical activism, when I initially think about radical activism, I think, okay, the most extreme kind of activism, but then I go back to my my Latin GCSE, and it's like, no, the radical is the root. It's like what is actually at the bottom. And there's a story told by Bayo Akomolafe, who I'm sure a lot of people are going to know. So you might know the story. So you can tell it with me if I get lost. But he tells this story about when he was in Schumacher College, and he's doing a talk on black bodies and the slave trade. I think it's this talk he does, and privilege. And at the end of the talk, white man comes up to him and he's like, I'm so sorry for the privilege that I hold. I'm so sorry that I suck out all the air out of a room. I'm so sorry that I get a seat at the table when you don't. And Bayo Akomolafe, who if anyone knows, you know he carries like a really great deal of trickster energy, like he's always channeling Eshu or Anansi, and he says to the guy, I don't want your apology. And the guy's like, oh no, I've done something even worse. And he's like, no, because yes, you may have a seat at the table, but there are many other tables in this room, and there are many other rooms in the house, and I don't want this table, and I don't want to be in this room. And I always like loved that story so much, because like you were saying, you know, we think activism needs to be like this and going out and doing like this, but at the root of it, he said, Bayo Akomolafe says, is I don't want a slice of a cancerous pie. And I remember when I was working in organizations, I remember I always used to laugh at it, where I was thinking like, oh, if I became CEO of this company, this would be like great snaps, because everyone knows the black woman is CEO of a company. But if this company is kind of an oil mining company, like who wins there? So coming back to this idea of it's at the root, it's like we can do all of this work to rearrange the pieces and put these people in this place and have these people in this place. But if we're not reinventing the values at the bottom, like who wins? So to the question of values and coming on to grief, can you put your hand up if you've had any initiation with grief in this lifetime? Okay, that actually brings tears to my eyes. Pretty much everyone. I know from my own initiations with grief, most deeply the death of my sister in 2021, it is the most transformative medicine that I've ever experienced. Like, it rips you from the core of your being and births you anew. And as I think about birthing a new world, it's like when we're in that fighting activism, it's like, hey, what's the problem? Can I fix it? There we go. When we're in that big, expanded, there's the inertia. And it's like, yeah, when we're in building, creating, we're building new stories. So if you have, I just loop it back, you're fighting and fixing, okay, let's tear down the old stories. You have the creation and the expansion, let's create new stories. But where is the space to hospice the stories that are dying? And for me, that's grief. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. That's as far as I've got. As far as I've got is like grief needs to be at the center of our activism. But I would love to ask you all, and to maybe a little more briefly, so we can go to questions from the audience, like, where is the role for grief in birthing the new world?
Gosh, another great question. It's like a full-day workshop. I love this question. I think this might be my favourite one because my full name is Olajoyegbee, and it means two things. It means God consoles your tears, and it also means to bereave the death of your elders. So my name means grief. And my goodness, it is an initiation that I've had a lot of. You know, my daughter is my third child, but my first was stillborn. My second died. My mother died before my daughter was born. My father died on my 47th birthday 2 years ago. Like, I have had a lot of very big moments of grief. And actually, as the word you use is used, it rips you. But the build that comes afterwards is extraordinary. And I feel like you're absolutely right. It's something that we shy away from, particularly in Western culture, actually. It's different. You know, my mum's culture and my father's culture, there's a different... Grief space is held in a different way. That's not to say that it's, you know, there's enough space, but it's held in a different way. And I think we need to think about grief as a form of initiation, right? It's like any rite of passage, you know, whether it's your christening or your marriage or, you know, going to school on your first day. We are constantly being initiated as humans. And this is a consistent initiation within all initiations, right? Because there's always a difficult part of that going to school, a difficult part of losing a friend, a difficult part of, bless you for sharing that holiday, losing your sister. That's just extraordinary. You know, what profound grief to experience in your lifetime, you know. I'm sorry. And I think you're absolutely right, which is if grief is at the centre of our activism, and this is what I was, I think, trying to get to in terms of this sense of embodiment, if we are feeling that which we are grieving, then the likelihood of that morphing into anger, rage, vitriol, spleen energy, more of the same being directed at others, making them wrong, I feel the likelihood of that is greatly reduced because we are able to alchemize and internalize and integrate a process that is utterly central to us being human. You know, I remember, if you haven't read it, I remember one of my favourite lines in a book I read about 20 years ago, which is The Road Less Travelled by Scott Peck. And I think in like the second chapter he says, life is a problem, get over it. And I remember just reading that line and being like, wow, like, thank you, you know, thank you for the reminder that as a human, I am going to have a life that is full of difficulty and grief. But as a resilient human, if I know how to build, and I have the space to build that resilience in community, in these spaces, which remind us that we are meant to do this, we are capable of doing it individually and holding each other, that there is huge potential for us. And I believe that grief within the centre of our activism will initiate our activism into new spaces, shapes, forms and sizes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. I'm living in daily grief these days with the doulaing of my mother that I'm doing, and for me, I had these three experiences when I was young. 19, 21, I had near-death experiences, and then 24, in this accident, my friend actually died, and so to be this 24-year-old that had witnessed a best friend dying and also was holding that story within the community, I was the one that perhaps could have done something differently, perhaps could have stopped it in some way, and all of that, and what I learned having to go on this very deep exploration of death at such a young age was that, yes, you lose things. You lose a life sort of within the realms of like the dominant culture, but you get invited into this extraordinary other world. And this is a world of death, of dying, of grief, of suffering, of having to go deeper. And you meet the people that are willing to have those conversations, that are willing to go deeper. And I think sometimes, you know, like we think that, okay, you know, if you're at an event and the 98 people that are like dancing are the ones having like the most potent time, and sort of speaking to what Baye said, you know, the two people talking about grief in the corner, like that can actually be an incredible place to be. And what I've learned is that through living a life where I've had to be so in touch with grief, I've got to know myself in extraordinary ways, and that every time I grieve something, it's like it takes me further out of any of the like the quote unquote shoulds of this life, and so much deeper to my soul's alignment. And so there is that invitation that to not shy away from that darkness and from being in these passages, because something so rich comes through it. And it's different. It's not necessarily what's on the cover of magazines or what people aspire towards, but it really connects you to something that is so potent within yourself. And we need a world that is potent. We humans, like, what the bleep, I've just seen the kiddies, are we doing here? Because, you know, we've made our culture so fake. Like so fake and so superficial, and where we spend our time and our energy, like, doesn't it just break your heart when you really think about it? The things that are important, the things that money goes to in this world, and actually, what we really need is a revolution of humans that are willing to step fully into the potentness of what they are and what they have to bring. And so if grief is the doorway that allows you to do that, please walk through it and I'll meet you there.
Beautifully said. I like that one. I'm going to write that one for later. So with grief, I am no stranger to the master teacher of grief. At 10, had a near-death experience, drowned in Lake Tanganyika. My cousin died right in front of me, and his last words, Muti, help me. That haunted me as a 10-year-old. I didn't understand what that meant. You come back to normal society and you go, school, problems, bills, all of these things, that does not make sense. What's important is experiencing this bridge between life and death, and what are we experiencing on this plane before we transition to the next one. And that became very clear to me as a 10-year-old boy in year 6. And I said, okay, cool, fantastic. Another key come through. The literal grief that my parents experienced that separated them when my sister was born and she didn't continue life. And then I embodied that grief in me energetically because they hadn't processed that, and it came out of my eczema, and I was hospitalized twice. I went temporarily blind twice in this eye and once in this eye. So grief has always been something that has modified my experience of life. It's brought me into a hardship, but allowed me to experience the resilience that now can bring me ease in my future. And if we think about grief as a stage, when you are meeting all humanity, when you go and speak to someone and say, recently, one of my brothers just passed, and you speak to anyone, the level of authentic relating you will get, because I'm about authentic relating. Let's not talk about here. Let's meet here. And if you can meet me in my pain and see me in my pain, and from that moment not shy away and say, whoa, it's too much, or this and the other, you can meet me here and say, wow, I felt that, and I feel you right now. How can I offer support in this moment? If you can genuinely open your heart to any person in that process, that is your humanity. That's the deepening of your humanity. So the keys to some of these moments, the grief into the activism, is that last year I was about to have a child. I lost a child, separated my whole separation as well, and took me back to my parents' dynamic, and I was able to call them out on some beautiful things. But in that process, I had to find myself again. I had to let go of all control I had, and I had to let a process run through me that I could not control. I could not dictate. I had to just let it be. And I found myself at an oak tree, tuning into the practice. And at an oak, you just have this beautiful remembrance. And I saw a bee just on the floor. And the bee just representing this harmony, this like hive mind, this frequency in the world. And seeing this bee on the floor and picking it up and saying, wow. And I see a shaft of light just come in through over my eyebrow. And this moment, I see this bee and I just hear this whisper and it just says, only in death can we know true life. Only in death can we know true life. Only in death can we know true life. And in that moment, I said a prayer, put the bee into the earth, and I listened deeply into my heart. And I just heard a voice and said, you need to create a space for melanated men to process grief in their life because they've experienced so much of it, they haven't had the opportunity to do that. Fast forward a year and a half later, we've created a group called Sons of Zion that sees black men crying together. Fathers who don't see their children, fathers who want to make up with their families in this way, but they have not had the safe enough environment to process or even share from the most vulnerable grief that they're having. Because we're grieving a timeline of harmony, of family. And when it's out of our control, we feel powerless and we don't know how to deal with that and we have to just go on. But when we create those spaces for that remembrance, for that resonance, and we are seen in our humanity with one another, then we can be on equal plane. And from that equal plane, we can all move together. Thank you.
Gorgeous, thank you. So in the name of having tea with friends, before we kind of all close up, is there anything that anyone here wants to share from their heart with the group? You are so welcome. Come have the mic. Anyone? Yeah. You want to come up?
I'm actually a little bit shaky listening to you all and speaking. I'm a Maya, and my dad is Persian Indian, and my mum is Welsh English. And often I find myself in this liminal space of mixed race in Britain, in a white community. And it's really hard. So just listening to you all was really, to the heart. And what you said, Amisha, about, I think it was Amisha, the need for more brown voices, like give them a mic, or maybe Remi, it was you, I can't remember. And actually, on things like Netflix, I'm seeing more brown people. When I was a kid, I didn't see any. And it's making a difference, but it's also how to, in life, our lives, generally going about mundane business, how to bring that up every day. And in the small acts as well as the big ones and the big festivals and the big talks. But those small acts of the microcosm, as one of you said, really resonated, and just elaborating on that would be lovely, but if we don't have time as well, just I'll take that away too. Thank you.
Thank you. I think someone could do a 1 minute riff on that, if anyone wants to.
In the small acts, given that you've just defined a bit of your history and how it's not always been easy, what would have helped you? What small acts would have helped you? Let's start there, because that's how we help each other understand, right?
So as a child, I guess, seeing more people, listening to more people, different cups of tea, not just black tea. Chai would have been great. What more? What would have helped?
Did you get a chance to talk about your mixed race heritage?
No, never.
Right.
Never.
So would it have helped if someone said, wow, like, where'd you get your beautiful dark hair from? Or
Oh, yeah, it was a shame. It was a
yeah,
shame.
right.
Oh, I feel really wobbly.
Oh, bless you, bless you.
Holding you. We're holding you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to hide it, Had to be white. Gulab jamun would have been good. More rose. I don't know.
I think you said so much in just those few words. Thank you. That's the thing. It's about speaking about what would help us, That's the thing. Just like when you said holiday, I was never even, because my parents were so in there, I was never even aware of colour until somebody brought it to me. Yeah. Do you know? When someone brings it to you or brings it to you in a way that's not nice because you're different, and why is your hair like that, and why are you eating that, And so I just think let's just ask each other, like, there's no fear then. Like, what can I do to try and understand your Farsi and English? Welsh did you say? How did they navigate that? Amazing.
I sort of feel my dad had the colonial mindset, as you say, like he had to, well, maybe he was born in 1940, so he was born in occupied India and then came to Britain, and he was an Anglophile. And I don't know if it's because he had to be, because he wanted to be, because he was told he should be, I don't know.
It's an enormous privilege that we are the generation of decolonization. And I don't feel that's something to take lightly. Like, we're being asked to do extraordinary amounts of work at this time, and it's not easy, and yet it's so beautiful. And I feel that not just with race, but with just with therapy, and the fact that we can come and be in all these spaces. Many of our parents' generation, they didn't have, like, my parents actually worked in mental health, but they didn't have embodiment within that. They didn't have, like, ancestral trauma stuff within that. And we're the generation that's got access to all of this. And it's amazing, and it's hard work, and we've got to support each other with it. But we've got to realize that, we're doing this work, and the generations before us didn't have the opportunity. And so, of course, a lot of them had colonial mindsets, and there's no shame in that, because it was a really strong system of oppression that we're still living in. But now we have language, and we have some tools, and we have some ways of gently unpacking it. And we're just at the beginning of a process. Like, we're on page 3 of the book are on this. And it's a really long book.
Yeah, thank you.
With actual words in it.
Would you like to ask your question, and we'll see if we can get to it quickly?
This feels like quite a small personal question, but ends hopefully with a bigger question. Yeah. I was recently faced with somebody from India who we just hit that big wall. There was just so much anger. I didn't recognise what was happening because I'd never experienced. I thought I was having a conversation with somebody, and they were spiralling into trauma. It's a little bit more complicated than that. They're also profoundly, exquisitely successful manipulator, but that's another story. I didn't know what to do with all of what came up. And I think the key word that is used now is decolonisation. And I'm not even terribly sure what my end of that is. So a lot of what you've talked about is for people of colour. But what do ancestors of perpetrators do to... to heal that wound.
Thank you so much for your courage in asking that question. Like, even before, to be honest, I think the question here is the answer, to model that courage of bringing that in here. Yeah. I want to acknowledge that real deeply.
Yes, thank you.
This is a question that is constantly asked to me and a lot of the people I hang around with. This allyship of how we co-create this new earth together asks you to acknowledge what has happened before, as you've done, so it can be seen, so it can be felt. It's not swept under the rug, and we don't pretend that that's not a subtext that has made the course of our narrative happen into this world. When you can happily stand in a space and acknowledge that your ancestors also are finding more peace in that. Our ancestors are finding more peace in that. It requires each of us to be able to go into those spaces and to see the height of an energy and come in with the stillness of saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this has happened at one point. It's not my fault, but I want to apologize on behalf of my ancestors. But we're here, and I'm here to co-create with you together. How can I be of service? How can I be of an allyship to you? How can I allow your voice to be amplified? How can I support your journey to go to where it can impact the thousands, the millions, the billions? You know, how can we work together? And you offer that open hand. You say you put your hands up, I'm sorry, and you offer that open hand, how can I support? For me, they're two embodied actions. I come in with nothing but open heart and sorrowness, remorse, and I come with an open hand of support. What can I do to support you? And then just really listening. And the other side of that is just deep listening and taking tender care to be present with that person. And there's going to be touching things that will come up around trust, but the unrequited love that you give in that moment of presence and stillness and listening is that trust building a foundation again and what can be our world together. Thank you.
Can I just build on that?
Yeah.
What he said, and I think it's also really. Firstly, thank you so much for bringing that, and I think it's also really important to be able to say, I don't know, actually, what to do with all of that, right? Because it's huge, and I think by trying to give an answer too quickly, which you're not doing, but I know that sometimes people want to respond from a place of love and they want to find a solution. We're all such solutionaries. And actually, exactly that deep listening, that space of just giving the room for something to land that's massive between you and I, or he and she, you know. And by you being able to say, I want to be able to help, but I don't know what to do with that. And actually, I also, and maybe not in that same moment, but I also think it's really important to acknowledge what you're saying around, just like we carry these things in our lines, what you're carrying in your line is also massive. And that needs space, and perhaps not in that same way, but it's, you know, we're all bringing through change, right? So I want to acknowledge how that will impact you. You know, I've spoken to many people who feel very ashamed of their lineage. They carry the burden of their ancestors. That's not helping them, you know. That's not helping them either. So as a family constellator, that's actually something that we really look at. How do we put down the burden so that we can actually find our rightful place in a system and be way more effective because we're resourced, right? But if we're not resourced and we're still carrying the burden, then actually we're moving that intergenerationally on and on and on and on. So I just want to honour that which you carry as well. We are all bringing our part. So space and deep listening sometimes is all we need at the very beginning. And maybe that's all we need for a very long time. And we just need to keep doing it really regularly, right? Yeah. You know? Because this isn't a short conversation. And maybe this is the space that we do every single year. And it's the same conversation. And every single year we have the same conversation, right? Because it's important. And that means and leads to something new. So thank you very, very much. Because I know that you'll be speaking on behalf of so many people that are holding that same. Yeah, bless you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We are at time. I know there are some other questions. Those conversations can continue in the Ubuntu Village tent, which is over there with the yellow and red. And I want to just close by saying how incredible that this whole talk was like torrential rain, the skies grieving, and now it's clear skies. And I mean, if there was ever a pathetic fallacy, you know, when the weather represents the mood? Yeah. For a conversation, I mean, come on. So, you know, your tears wash the wound. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming and being here with us. Beautiful, beautiful conversation. And thank you, these amazing panelists, for bringing forward your hearts and your minds and your souls and your lineage. Deeply grateful.
Thank you, Holiday, for holding us so beautifully.